Time to run the numbers, and that means business with Kate Moody. Hello, Kate.
Charlie.
You're taking a closer look at the economic implications of one of our big stories, this rift between France and Turkey.
Yeah, this dispute related, of course, to the French government's defense of freedom of expression. The Turkish president has now joined calls for a boycott of French goods across the Middle East. Cars, cosmetics, and food produced in France or by French companies could be affected. But France's employers' union says it's far from clear whether the threatened boycott will indeed become a reality, and insists that it won't allow its members to be blackmailed over the country's values. And the top official for foreign trade said the overall effect on France's economy would be limited.
These are boycotts of agro-food products. Exports to the Middle East equate to just over 1 billion euros. That's about 4% of our global exports. So it's quite limited.
Let's check in on the day's trading action. Now, Wall Street closed sharply lower amid a record surge in new cases of coronavirus across the United States. The Dow Jones down about 650 points in its biggest one-day drop since early September. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ each down over 1.5% there. Investors in the U.S. no longer optimistic that lawmakers will indeed reach a compromise on another round of stimulus aid, although stocks did pare back their earlier sharper losses as the Treasury Secretary held talks on the issue with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. We saw sharp falls for the major European indices as well, the DAX plunging nearly 4% after German tech company SAP abandoned its medium-term profitability target. The company's share price plunged over 20%. The CAC 40 was down nearly 2% at the close. Members of the World Trade Organization have given the European Union the green light to impose tariffs on $4 billion worth of U.S. goods in a long-standing dispute over subsidies to aviation giants. A panel gave approval for the move earlier this month, but it needed the final go-ahead from the WTO's members. U.S. farm equipment and agricultural products are expected to be targeted. The U.S. said it regretted the EU's plans, but has made no move to remove its own tariffs on European goods. Both sides have been found to be giving illegal state support to plane makers Airbus and Boeing, and the dispute has dragged on for over a decade. Separately, Washington has filed an appeal against a WTO ruling which said American tariffs on Chinese goods imposed in 2018 were inconsistent with global trade rules. Italy has tightened its restrictions to curb the spread of the coronavirus pandemic. The latest measures will see restaurants and cafes close at 6 p.m., a move the industry says may cripple them. Fraser Jackson has more.
It's last orders in the Italian capital as the new curfew looms. The government's order for bars and restaurants to be closed by 6 p.m. has not been well received.
Avoiding dinner is not the problem because the government is not asking me to shut down completely. It's as if we've already shut down though, because our restaurant is in a really touristy place and during the week no one comes for lunch.
The government is hoping to avoid another nationwide lockdown that battered Italy's stagnant economy and allow for a more relaxed Christmas. But for some of those in this cafe, closing the country's restaurants early isn't the answer.
You should take the right measures. Wear protective masks, use plexiglass and other things, but you shouldn't do a partial closure. Close everything or don't close.
Establishments can offer takeout and delivery services until midnight, but the majority of business happens in the evening. Many restaurants in Italy typically don't start serving dinner until around 8 p.m. The new measure is likely to have a crippling effect on Italy's €71 billion restaurant industry, which has only had a few months to help claw back losses from March and April's lockdown. The European Union says that the bloc's restaurant and hotel industries suffered a massive 79.3% drop between February and April. Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has promised more financial aid for the hospitality sector as soon as November.
The British pharmacy chain Boots says it's launching in-store testing for COVID-19 with results that could be available within minutes. Customers will be able to have the now traditional nose swab, which has to be sent to a lab for results, starting immediately in a number of cities across the country. But within a few weeks, an in-store device will be installed, which can produce results in just 12 minutes. Both of those tests will cost around £120. That's €133, equivalent. It's aimed at people who don't have symptoms but who need a negative test result in order to travel or visit friends and family.
Asymptomatic patients only. We think it's going to be used by people who want to go travelling, people who have a real purpose, they want to go and see an elderly relative perhaps, or perhaps for companies who want to make sure that their colleagues, when they come into work for the first time, definitely don't have COVID.
The charity ActionAid says tech giants are using loopholes to avoid paying nearly $3 billion worth of taxes in developing countries. Companies including Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google aren't accused of actively evading taxes or of breaking the law, but ActionAid says that if those companies paid even a minimum corporate tax rate, governments in countries like India, Indonesia, Brazil, Bangladesh, and Nigeria could be bringing in some $2.8 billion in tax revenue. The anti-poverty group has urged a global tax on tech companies beyond the measures that are being debated by the OECD. Well, Facebook has announced it's launching a cloud gaming service. Users will be able to try and play free games without leaving the platform, but it'll only be available on its desktop website or Android app because of what it describes as arbitrary policies by Apple. Apple restricts applications which function as a third-party app store from being used on its devices with its iOS. There have been tensions between the tech giants since 2018 when Apple CEO Tim Cook criticized the social network's handling of user data after the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Gaming is the most lucrative sector for mobile apps. For now, Facebook is aiming to attract casual gamers without fees. Well, it's been a rough year for French cinema houses. After this spring's lockdown, the battered industry is now facing a curfew during one of its busiest times of day. In response, cinemas have started showing films earlier and earlier, an approach that seems to be catching on.
With curfew restrictions on school holidays, French families don't need an excuse to catch an early bird movie.
Under these circumstances, we'll come on Sunday mornings more regularly to encourage and support our friends in the film world.
The curfew in place across much of France means businesses must close by 9 p.m. To make up for the resulting loss in takings, some cinemas are opening their doors from 8 a.m, a radical departure for venues that usually cater to half their customers in the evenings.
We're retired, so we don't really need to go to the cinema after 9 p.m.
But despite the earlier opening hours, audiences fell by half in September compared to the same time last year. Many cinemas are relying on government funding to survive.
To compensate for the losses made on ticket sales in the areas where the curfew's in place, putting movies on earlier allows cinemas to stay open.
The curtain looks set to fall on a tough year for French cinema, with attendance numbers to date down by 63%.
Nice to have an excuse to go for a morning movie if you can squeeze it in there, Charlie, supporting the local industry.
Kate, thank you so much. All the business news we need to know.